Greetings, welcome to In-Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. Now, this entire conversation, it started on the premise of one line. Innovation in teams gets best supported in environments with psychological safety. That really made me start to dive down the rabbit hole a little bit because doing a little digging, that line led to another one in terms of the best corporate innovators don't leave innovation to chance. They cultivate leadership, culture, and repeatable systems that make innovation a way of life, delivering richer business outcomes. We are going to speak with the gentleman who's responsible for these words, these sage words of advice, Lorenzo Hodges. He is an award-winning innovation strategist, experienced designer, business executive, and educator. He joins us now. We're going to have a conversation. Mr. Hodges, thank you so much for joining us. I want to start off, please, because I like to start with definitions in terms of world building, psychological safety as it pertains to innovation. Please define.
Okay, so psychological safety essentially is a context within which the members of a team would feel comfortable being themselves, sharing ideas, and interacting openly without any sense of intimidation or fear of penalty or being insulted or rebuked and so on. So essentially, what psychological safety does is that it allows a certain level of trust to be built within teams and for really healthy interactions to take place, especially when you have leaders and team members. And when I say leaders and team members, meaning you may have higher ranked individuals in the room and lower ranked individuals in the room. Often when there are people of different ranks within the room, the respect that is required or the way in which people then relate often changes. So to the extent that there is psychological safety, the juniors in the room especially, the less senior people, are the ones who are able to thrive as well as the senior people within the room.
What does that say about policy versus personality? And I asked that question because I remember having one lecturer talk about every conversation has a power dynamic in it. Uh, there's some individuals, regardless of the situation that they're in, they allow a little more, as opposed to, nah, boy, I'm not going to talk to that person they don't bite nice or this sort of thing. And it seems as though personality also has a part to play in allowing for that psychological safety. How do we try to move a little more away from the personality of an individual towards building a system that is repeatable, that can be scalable?
That's a really good question. So personality is a wonderful thing in any context if used appropriately. Okay. And so what we don't want in teams in general is that people lose their personality. If someone is funny, you want that humor to be brought into the conversation. If someone has a really astute mind and so says clever things, you want those clever statements to be made, right? So you do want people to bring their personality, but the thing is personality has to be managed. And so the key thing is a simple word called self-restraint and self-government, that when you are inside of a team context, you have to be self-aware and you have to manage yourself so that your personality then doesn't overthrow the interactions or dominate the interaction so much that it becomes toxic or unproductive, which means that you have to then keep yourself in check essentially, right? You don't want that your personality as a leader is so dominant that everyone just stays silent throughout a meeting. Imagine if you're trying to brainstorm to generate ideas to solve some critical problem, and your personality, your presence is so strong that everyone is intimidated by you and feels that they don't have the permission to add a new perspective or add a new idea to the conversation. So essentially, personalities aren't a bad thing, but personalities can't be the dominant thing. It has to be managed. And that's where character trumps personality. Character is personality is your external expression that comes from who you are. Character is the internal set of values that manage and govern your life. And so if we build stronger, more potent characters, it allows us to then manage the external expression, which is personality. And that allows for safe environments that everyone could come together, feel themselves and manage themselves, right? Feel like themselves and manage themselves, knowing there are things that are appropriate in the context of a team, which is very different from if you're sitting in your living room watching Netflix, right? So the context matters, but character trumps the personality in this case.
And I like the fact that you talk about that level of emotional intelligence and being self-aware, able to do personal audits, because some people say that what we would have once described as soft skills shouldn't necessarily be described that way because of the importance to having a lot of these things operate with a level of efficiency. But I like the fact that you talk about at home watching Netflix versus within the professional environment, the work organization, because I also want to ask, how do you kind of set those distinctions between individual innovation different to team or organization individual? Because sometimes what somebody is trying to bring to the table may not necessarily take hold because of where it's coming from as well.
Individual versus team. So it's a good distinction to make. When you are on your own, you have the most liberty. So you can manage the level of risk that you take. And so your risk appetite would inform how far you go and how far you push the boundaries of innovation at any point in time, because you don't have to be mindful of what's happening with other people, at least in the space where the innovation is taking place. You do have to be mindful of other people if you're creating an innovation that is for other people. Okay. And most innovations are designed to impact other people's lives. And that's an important frame of thinking that all innovators would have. How do I design something that's not just useful to me, but something that would be useful to the consumers or the other businesses within the market that would buy from me? So back to the individual has room to play. You can sketch, you can draw, you can laugh by yourself, you could play music out loud because that gets you in the zone. You make yourself comfortable. So the main thing you have to manage is your time at that point. When you're in a team context, you still have time to manage, but you then have other people and personalities to interact around. So you have to be mindful of how does my behavior impact the others around me. Now, there's a lot of talk about being authentic on the job. And so you do want to be authentic. In other words, you don't want to come across as fake, and you don't want to be fake for that matter. So you do have to be true to who you are, but even in being true to who you are, you have to set boundaries around how you express that, because how you express that can, in fact, intimidate someone else, or it could be off-putting. If you are, and I've seen in different teams, often we've seen the extroverts are the ones who tend to be a lot more vocal, and the introverts often are the ones who are less vocal. So if you have a meeting and you have a limited time for half an hour, if not managed, the more vocal people will talk for that entire half an hour. And it may feel productive, but you will underperform in that half an hour because you would have limited the number of perspectives that were allowed to join into the conversation. What that means in a practical sense is that the extroverts have to manage themselves and be mindful. Look, I do want to hear from my other colleague, so I can't steal the floor all the time. But also the introverts have to manage themselves to recognize, hey, if I don't speak up, then we don't get a balanced view of the problem that we're solving, or we don't get enough ideas for the solution that we're trying to create. And so both types, and I'm just using extroverts and introverts for now, but there will be all kinds of mixes of people and personalities in a collaborative innovation context. The key thing is, if we manage ourselves by putting boundaries around how we interact, how far we go, dial back when we need to, dial up when we need to, it makes things a lot more dynamic, but also it makes things healthy so that the end outcome, which is the most important thing, is achieved. What's that end outcome? The end outcome is you want the best solution to the problem, or you want the best product for the market, or the best service for your customers. Whatever the thing is that you're trying to innovate and create, the team would create the richest thing. Synergy is a real thing, right? And so you want the synergistic power, the value of we came together and produced something beautiful and rich and dynamic that will delight the people that it was designed for. There's nothing like that.
And there's nothing like the fact that time is flying in this conversation, and I appreciate the conversation thus far. We take a short break. We are speaking with Lorenzo Hodges, speaking more to innovation. The jump-off premise was psychological safety as it can help to generate innovation. Stay with us. We'll return after this. Welcome back. We are speaking with Lorenzo Hodges. We are speaking about innovation, and we started from the point of psychological safety as it helps to bring innovative minds and ideas to the table. And I appreciate the fact that we've done some world building, set a foundation, looking at bringing innovation and that psychological safety in the group. If there were indicators, key indicators, these are the boxes that I need to check. Is it possible to do it like that, to map it out like that?
Could you repeat the question, please? I just want to understand the
not
angle
a
from which you're
problem.
coming.
Sometimes people talk about art, sometimes people talk about science. If this is something that I can directly translate or just transplant rather from one company to another, what are some of those boxes that I need to check to be able to build that system that has that psychological safety kind of enmeshed in it, to be able to have a company that is agile, a company that is innovative, a company that is doing what I wanted to do?
Okay, so you're touching on two interesting things. One is the psychological safety, which is a component of the second, which is the wider corporate culture that would produce innovation. Okay, so the psychological safety is important, and really to build an environment of psychological safety, it often starts with the leaders within that environment themselves being able to manage themselves. If the leaders could manage their emotions and regulate the way in which they interact with others, create a space where others feel empowered to share their ideas, allow and permit others to question the status quo without fear of some sort of penalty. If leaders could engage in conversations that draw out the best within their teams and so on, if leaders could manage even their own critical mind, because sometimes you are so experienced, so many years that you've seen things work. So if someone brings an idea to you, your instinct could be to shut that idea down. And in shutting that idea down, what you're doing is you're closing off the avenues for further innovation or further ideation in the future, where that person may feel bruised by the way in which you shut that idea down. And so you want to be able to engage differently and invite, tell me more about that idea. Here's my concern with that idea and why I feel it might not work. What do you think about that? In which case, there's more engagement with the team member as compared to simply saying, no, that's not going to work. And so the tone of voice and all of those things have to be managed. But again, it's the leader's responsibility to create that kind of space. That then gets replicated by the rest of members of the team because they see a pattern coming from the leader, which says mutual respect, making room for others, deferring for others to comment and so on, is healthy and allows us to then come up with the best solutions. So that's dealing a bit with the psychological safety component. In terms of the wider culture of innovation, there are a number of ingredients that you do need. You need leadership, you need the right structures, you need the right systems. We spoke a bit about leadership. Some of your structures could include actual innovation labs that you may have within your organization. And within that lab, you encourage experimentation, that people could go test things out and try things out. And so the lab itself feeds into the culture, because in the lab, as you experiment, you build a culture of experimentation. That's an essential thing in environments like that. The notion of trial and error should be celebrated. We had an idea in relation to how we may solve a problem, and we determined, let's go try it once. That didn't work. Let's try another way. Oh, that didn't work. Let's try another way. And staying in that zone where you can manage your risks by testing different options for the solution allows for an environment where learning is fostered through experimentation.
Well, Mr.
As people
Hodges,
learn, you
can
find
we
better
afford to
ways to
have
solve
those
the
sort
problem.
of things? I want to say,
Sorry?
can we afford to have that level of experimentation, especially if I'm managing my risks? I'm very mindful that these are the things that we're working with and we need to stay in the black. Do these things cost money? And, people talk about cost versus investment. How do we start to rationalize some of these things? And in terms of saying, okay, well, we cannot necessarily afford not to.
I was just about to ask that question. Can you afford not to? Because the cost of inaction could be very high. You may find yourself, depending on the industry that you're in, you may find yourself being disrupted in time to come. Or you may find yourself not being able to respond to new dynamics in the market. We are in a world where uncertainty, unfortunately, is increasing day by day. It's difficult to put a finger on exactly how things are going to go in the future, because things are tumultuous and there are many crises popping up here and there in the world, which means every individual organization has to build the capacity to innovate their way forward in order to stay relevant. Now, in terms of the cost, it doesn't have to cost you much. Your mindset is the first thing that it costs you, a shift in your mindset to become one that is engaging, which means collaboration between teams. So the kinds of, in terms of structure, going back to structure, kinds of teams that you have, you want it to be cross-functional, meaning have representations from different corners of the organization. Bring marketing and sales and HR and accounting, a mixed team into the conversation. You're going to get dynamic perspectives because there's no one size fits all in the room. It is people who have different levels of expertise and disciplines that are being brought in. So engage those people. You will get richer ideas. In terms of the actual testing, so if you have the right people in the room, the testing itself doesn't have to be expensive. In many cases, you can save a lot of money by simply creating prototypes. Prototypes are a small version of whatever the concept is. And I'll give you a quick example. Years ago, I was working with a team at the University of the West Indies, providing some coaching for them. This team of engineers were creating a smart recycle bin. And that's this, think about a bin, but it's smart enough to know when you put in bottles, when you put in plastics, when you put in other materials, and it will automatically sort this stuff. Really cool, fantastic, bright team. They went from their idea to an initial sketch to fabrication. Fabrication meaning they raised the funds and they hired a metal fabricator to build the bin. And I told them, stop. Before you go build the bin, which is the most of your cost, so think about a final set of expenditure, pause and create a prototype using cardboard. When they built the cardboard version, they discovered that the design that they had for the metal version that they were going to spend a lot of money on They spent very little money on the cardboard because they basically just found cardboard from supermarkets. When they built it, they discovered they had not figured out how to lock and unlock the bin to take the bags out. And it sounds kind of fundamental and obvious, but their design missed it. They found out they had no area for servicing the smart components within the bin, which is where all of the, let's just say, the computerized parts of it would go, and a number of other things. So what it meant is they could cut the cardboard again, and they could do different iterations of it at a low cost before going towards what would be a finished thing. And so there are ways in which you can de-risk or reduce the risks associated with your experimentation, and also use experimentation as a way in which you could reduce the overall final cost of any new innovation that you're engaging in.
I really like that, and thank you for that practical example. Now, in the short amount of time that we have, we spoke about groups, we spoke about leaders. Speak to us about team members and the mindset that may be necessary, because sometimes people will say, nah, man, if I give them that idea, they will tell me to run with that like Mr. Killer. They might want to pay me more money. Uh, so to the person who thinks that more ideas equals more work, how do you treat with that?
Yeah, sometimes more ideas does equal more work, but it's the good kind of work. Because without the ideas, it means you're stuck in the past. And being stuck in the past is not a good thing, except where you're bringing forward past values that are eternal, like integrity and honesty. Some of those things, those are good things from the past that we want to take into the future. But the way in which we work, we want to stay relevant. So you want to then keep moving. And that's one of the things in a culture of innovation. There's a bias for action and a bias for change, where you keep transforming. So I'll say 3 E's. The first is you do want inquiry, people to inquire, to question things. That's important. You want experimentation, which I mentioned before, which is trying new things. And the third thing within the team for regular individuals, that's how they think about it, is they want to explore. Look into things you haven't done before and new spaces, new arenas that you could begin to venture into. If you bring in inquiry, the questioning, experimentation, which is doing things by trial and error, and then exploration, which is taking larger risks to venture out into the wild ideas that you hadn't considered before, what you do is you push the envelope and you create new space for the organization to grow and stay relevant for the future that's coming.
I'm glad I asked the question. I didn't know you had 3 E's in your pocket. That sounds like another LinkedIn post. I need to continue looking at the page. But Lorenzo Hodges, we want to thank you very much, CEO and Chief Innovation Officer at Plain White Table Incorporated. And we want to thank you for tuning in. This has been In Depth with me, Dike Rostant. Thank you so much for joining us.